on the farming and planet side of things, which is, I think, is a very, very interesting topic, we have quite a lot of anti-meat and cow rhetoric going on right now that this is absolutely going to destroy the planet. I think that Ireland was talking about destroying over half the herd in Ireland. I don't know if they've actually are carrying that out, but that was something that was going on for a while. There's the new Bovaer supplements. Say, my goodness, this natural process of methane production from fermentation that happens all across the world right now with all the rotting vegetation to much larger extent than in cows. Obviously, this is the worst thing that ever happened, even though it's been happening for billions of years. So about that, what would be your response to these accusations and recriminations about the livestock industry and its impact on the environment?
Yeah, so the subtitle of our book is How Cows Reverse Climate Change, because they actually do. They don't contribute to it. Ruminants don't contribute to it. All the media emphasis and even in the UN assessments of livestock emissions, they just emphasize emissions, and they don't mention that it's actually a cycle. It's the biogenic carbon cycle. And so they're literally just talking about the emissions part of the methane production. As you say, we've had ruminants on this planet for 50 million years, far longer than we've been around, and in similar numbers to the numbers we have today, wild and domesticated. And we've got lots and lots of species of ruminants, lots of wild ruminants that everybody just ignores. It only seems to be domesticated livestock that cause methane and climate change. But in fact, what we've got is a cycle. The cow produces methane, but that methane has come from the carbohydrate that the cow ate from the grass. The carbon is converted into methane. It's a byproduct of the ruminant digestive system that the bugs make in the rumen. And the methane is produced, but it is broken down within a fairly quick time, around about 10 years, back to carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is then taken out of the air again by the plants, which the animal then eats. So we've just got a cycle. There's no additional methane being added to the atmosphere. There's no additional carbon dioxide being added to the atmosphere. And in fact, it's climate negative, carbon negative, because there are other processes associated with that biogenic carbon cycle in which carbon is drawn down, sequestered from the atmospheric carbon dioxide into the soil beneath the grassland. And it's really only beneath grassland. You don't get the same thing happening in arable cropland. In fact, any agriculturalist will tell you that if you do soil samples of grassland and arable land, the arable land is always lower in carbon content than the grassland, because grassland sequesters carbon from the atmosphere. So the grass plants are secreting sugars from their roots into the soil. There's fungal mycelium that helps to get that sugar from the plant roots into the soil, and that contributes to the buildup of organic matter in the soil below grassland. If you're one of the problems is that the media never talks about the harms that arable crop production causes. And if we're looking at climate change, there's far more emissions from crop production, and they're more harmful carbon dioxide emissions. That carbon dioxide isn't broken down rapidly in the way that methane from animals is. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of other sources of methane. So the increase in wet rice production globally, lots of fugitive emissions from fossil fuel leakage. There was a paper in 2016 showing that the fugitive emissions probably 60% higher than we thought. And in crop production, arable crop production, you've got arable plants which are annual plants, so they have to be. You have to prepare a seed bed every year. You have to plant the plants every year, usually in the spring, sometimes in the autumn, and the every time that you plough the land, or even with less destructive tillage systems, you're exposing the soil to the atmosphere, and the organic matter in the soil, which is carbon rich, is breaking down when it's exposed to the air and producing lots of emissions of carbon dioxide. And there's a lot of data that shows that about a third of the carbon or the carbon dioxide that's been added to the atmosphere by human activity has come from our soil because of crop tillage, mainly from crop tillage, some other sources, but that's the main thing. Whereas with grassland's a perennial plant. You can grow it indefinitely without needing to plough it, especially on regenerative systems. So the carbon is always building up. The surface of the soil is always protected by the grass. The grass plants are much more dense than in an arable crop. There's lots of exposed soil between the plants in an arable crop. And in many arable crops, you're sowing in the spring, harvesting in the late summer, autumn, and then the rest of the year, the land is bare. With our farmers these days, we are always advising them, if they're growing arable crops, to put in a cover crop so that the land isn't bare for a lot of the time. So that helps to reduce the emissions, and also to help reduce the erosion of the soil by rain and wind and so on. But it doesn't you don't get sequestration of carbon in those arable crops. And the other thing is that the tillage and the agrochemicals that are used are destroying the fungi in the soil. So you haven't got that aspect going. And but these things are never talked about in the media. We hear incessantly about the harms of livestock farming, and they are only ever talking about intensive livestock farming. There's no nuance, no understanding that livestock farming doesn't have to be intensive. Most of the beef cattle in the world are reared at pasture, and beef and lamb in Britain and most parts of the world, it's the lowest input food production system, the lowest environmental impact, and it has a lot of other benefits in terms of you're providing habitat. Those animals, if you manage them well, can live alongside wildlife and encourage wildlife, whereas arable production just removes the habitat. And the other thing that people don't make the connection with, and the media never make the connection, is most people understand that pesticides are bad, and we hear the news all the time about the collapse of insect populations and earthworm populations, and yet the media and the environmental lobby just never make the connection that is due to crop production, not livestock production, or at least not pasture reared cattle and sheep.
The media's ignorance on diet is only matched by their ignorance on farming. As Ali says, if there's a story about meat or methane, they'll make a direct link between methane and livestock. But when there's a story about agrochemicals, it's farming in general. Not whereas actually the majority of agrochemicals are poured onto arable.
99%, the UK government data shows 99% of pesticide use in this country, and we have the best pesticide data records in the world. 99% of those pesticides are used on arable crop land, less than 1% used on grassland and in livestock production. We just don't use pesticides most of the time. There's hardly any.
We did a calculation it depends which source you read online. The one I went with was Encyclopedia Britannica. It said in the kind of the latitudes of the UK, there should be around 2,400 insects per square metre of land. That's an insect every 2 centimeters.
Mm.
They're probably quite tiny. You probably can't see them. You see the big ones, can't see the little ones. If you multiply that by the number of hectares of land in the UK that are under crop production, that's 100 trillion insects.
Mm.
And we're spraying that how often with insecticides?
Well, as I say, most of the arable land in Britain and in most developing countries is sprayed. You know, less than 2% of our land, arable land in this country, is organic. The rest is sprayed. Most wheat crops will get 6 or 7 sprays per season with 20 toxic elements to that, and a cocktail of different sprays, which are, you know, over the years, they've become more and more toxic, more and more effective at killing the pests, but also much more effective at killing everything else. And these cocktails are also, you know, they're combining herbicides as well. So we're obliterating any of the plants that might provide habitat for insects and other things. And this just leads to a complete ecosystem breakdown. You know, as Rachel Carson in the 1960s showed us in Silent Spring, we talk about this in the book. You know, Silent Spring was published in the 1960s, identified the harms caused by DDT and other pesticides, and that was cascading right up through the ecosystem, insects, birds, mammals, everything. We just haven't taken that message on board. And those pesticides are for crop production. And the other element of that is that people don't understand, because so few people have any connection with farming these days, is that we have delinked our arable farming from our livestock farming in the last century. So historically, until the last century, until the coming of oil and agrochemicals and big machinery, crops were always grown in rotations that had grass in them as well. So you'd have a couple of years of wheat or barley, and then you'd have 1 or 2 or maybe longer of grassland grazed by cattle or sheep. So you've got the manure going in. And the reason for this is because it's long been understood by anybody that's ever been involved in farming that crops deplete the soil of its nutrients and its carbon content. You need grass and livestock to put that back in the form of manure and the sequestration from the grass. So we have, in the last, particularly since the Second World War, the coming of big machinery and agrochemicals, we thought that we could just get rid of livestock. It's quite inconvenient to have to move cattle and sheep around if you're you just want a big drive around in big combine harvesters and tractors and so on, and you can have nice square fields and so on, big fields. So we've removed the livestock. So I worked for 12 years in the east of England, which is our main crop growing area. And there were no livestock in the main, in the crop growing areas, Lincolnshire and so on, just continuous crops of wheat, barley, sugar beet, oilseed rape, all those arable crops. And that kind of farming is completely dependent on agrochemicals. So the nutrition for the crop has to be provided by artificial nitrogen and phosphorus, and
which has a huge carbon footprint when it's manufactured. Huge carbon footprint.
And we're losing our soils.
These, am I right, Ali? Some of these external inputs don't get included when the UN calculate the carbon footprint of our versus life.
No. With the UN assessment, they've done a series of livestock emissions assessments, global livestock emissions assessments. There is no comparative assessment of the crop sector. We have to eat either or crops or animals or a mixture. So you have to assess those. as well. And when any assessments that have been done with the livestock assessments that the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization, has done, they do it from farm to fork. So every single emission is counted, whether it's for transport or for fertilizer going in, if there is, and then there's an assumption that it's mainly intensive livestock as well. And the methane and so on. But with crop farming, the fuel that's used for the crop production, so there's an awful lot of diesel and so on going into crop production, not into livestock production. That fuel is counted as part of the energy sector, not as part of the crop sector. The transport of those crops to market is counted as part of the energy sector and so on, or the transport sector. So those things, it's creative accounting, and we're not comparing like with like, yeah. So these are the problems of that. But
we did a calculation. I don't think it's in the book. We did it later, going back to the insecticides and agrochemicals. So I said that figure earlier, about 2,400 insects per square meter of UK land, an insect every 2 centimeters. It takes about a square meter of wheat to grow enough wheat to mill enough flour to make 1 loaf of bread. So that's 2,400 insects have been sprayed on that area of land to produce a loaf of bread. If you get about 24 slices in a loaf, it's 100 dead insects per slice of bread. If you think you're being vegan for environmental reasons, ethical, animal, saving animal reasons, you're not. Every time you have a loaf of bread or any other kind of plant-based food, animals have died to produce that. So it's shocking that
what we're saying actually is that a meat-based diet is more ethical and humane. Fewer animals are killed to support a pure meat diet as opposed to a pure plant-based diet.
For instance, what people just don't understand is that, if they think that if they're just eating a dinner plate that's just full of vegetables and grains, bread, whatever, that they're not killing any animals. That's completely, unrealistic. Yeah. So in this country alone, we kill 3 million wood pigeons a year, a shot, mainly to protect arable crops. That's just one species of bird. All the birds that are protected by law in this country are allowed to be shot to protect arable crops. And also people don't take, for instance, the focus in terms of sort of animal welfare, animal rights, there's a big issue, big controversy in this country about the killing of badgers or to protect cattle from TB. Whatever you think about the science of that, nobody talks about the fact that we kill every autumn around about 350,000 deer in this country, because deer have no predator in this country. And they cause massive crop damage if the numbers get too high. They also cause damage to woodlands and to habitat for nightingales and other things. So we cull them every year, but and there are lots of animals that we are killing in huge numbers to protect crops: rabbits, hares, birds, deer, lots of things, and of course the insects, the earthworms. There are plenty of trials from reliable institutes like the Rothamsted Institute that show the loss of insect life, and it's much wider than insects. In some sites, the earthworm population is being reduced by at least 50% down to 100%. So in those cases, you are destroying the soil, because earthworms create soil. And we're getting massive levels of soil erosion here and in the arable areas of this country. So there's there's an idea that you can have a vegan diet and that the world could go vegan or plant-based, and we could just farm in a plant-based way without any livestock. That would be catastrophic because we need those livestock, because organic farming, regenerative farming requires livestock. Otherwise, you're completely dependent on pesticides and artificial fertilizers and lots of oil.
So that's why, the conclusion of the book is that, as well as the Sapiens diet of pasture-fed livestock is the best way of farming. The least destructive. In fact, it's not just destructive, it rebuilds soil, rebuilds the structure of the soil. The soil is healthier.
It's the diet for people and planet.
The environment, ecosystems are much healthier. So it's good for the planet, it's good for the environment, and it supplies nutritious food that becomes the Sapiens diet, or whatever kind of animal-based diet you're following. Which we, as we've already discussed earlier in the program, is the best for human health. So it's win-win.
And it helps grow vegan brains, which is good.
Another thing, just to add, is that we, in this country, in Britain, we import 2/3 of our fruit and vegetables into this country. And the environmental costs of those food imports are huge. One of the fab foods currently are almonds. Most of our almonds come from California. They're killing 50 billion bees a year to produce almonds in California with the pesticides and cocktails and so on. A huge loss of bees and so on. Likewise with avocados, we import a lot of avocados. The water footprint of those avocados is absolutely huge. In some parts of Chile, the local community are being restricted to 50 litres of water per person per day, which is about 1/3 of what we use in Britain per person. But meanwhile, the avocado plantations are using more than that amount per tree. Those areas. So and there's a myth
that's why we say embargo the avocado.
You can't walk past a cafe or coffee shop in the United Kingdom without seeing someone eating smashed avocados on toast with chili flakes and a squeeze of lime. And they think they're being healthy and environmentally friendly. Absolutely not. That avocado has flown halfway around the world. It's already, as Ali said, diverted water resources in the places where it's grown, and it's flown halfway around the world. I mean, how is that a good way to eat?
Yeah.
Most of our food waste is coming from plant foods.
Yeah, we didn't say that at the beginning. The other big thing I've noticed following the diet is I hardly throw any food away. No more soggy lettuce or cucumbers in the fridge, no more moldy apples in the fruit bowl, no more moldy sourdough in the bread bin. It's a really efficient way of eating.
There's one other myth that we should just talk about a little bit, is there's an idea that animals are taking up land that could be used to grow more crops and feed more people. That's complete and utter nonsense, because 2/3 of the world's agricultural land is actually marginal land. And in Britain, more than half of our land is marginal land, which means that it's not suitable for growing crops. It's either too steep or the soil's too poor, one reason or another why you can't grow crops on it. So we, all over the world, what we do is we rear livestock on it. Pastoral herder communities. We've got 1.3 billion pastoral herders around the world, and I worked with many of them in Mongolia a few years ago. Mongolia is an example. It's a country that could not support human life if it were not for ruminant livestock or grazing livestock such as horses as well. They just couldn't exist as a community, and they traditionally always ate a diet very similar to the Sapiens diet that we're recommending, although with a lot of dairy produce. So it's just crazy. If we were to convert that marginal land to crop growing, we would do massive damage in terms of soil damage, in particular.
And releasing carbon into the atmosphere.
Carbon, yeah.
Yeah.
And there are other agendas at foot on that. So in Mongolia, the land is there are a lot of minerals in that land.
No. Goodness. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. Well, no, and it must be bad for the environment. The strip mines would fix that real easily, get rid of all those animals. It's funny when you start adding these things up. I remember coming across someone who was talking about avocados, for instance, and it's not like it's monocropping where you're tearing up the soil and killing all the the gophers and ground squirrels and snakes all the time, but it's just there. There are trees growing year after year, but there are a lot of ground squirrels and other sorts of rodents that are trying to eat your avocados, and you have to poison them and kill them. And for a certain area to be successful as an avocado farm, I think it's something like 30, 40 hectares or something like that is like a minimum. And for that size of a farm, you're killing tens of thousands of these rodents and birds that are trying to eat your crop. And there was a study out of University of New South Wales, 2011, that said that, or showed that, to grow 1 kg of plant-based protein, you necessarily had to kill 25 times the number of sentient animals, not including insects.
We've quoted that study.
Oh, perfect.
In our chapter that's called "Wheat is Murder."
Yeah. Well, that's it. I've heard the argument from the vegan side that, well, you're having that animal killed in order to eat it. These animals are just dying. It's just sort of happenstance. It's just like hitting a deer in the road. It doesn't count. It's a gimme. It's like a tax rebate. It's a tax loophole or something like that. Yeah. And of course, no, you're responsible for it. If your growing practices harmed animals in the environment, then of course you're responsible for that. You can't say that we're responsible for the death of an animal because we've eaten that animal. You're responsible for those animals because you're trying to eat the plants, and you necessarily had to kill those animals to grow those crops. I think something like 700 million birds in America get poisoned due to agro farming, and about a tenth of those die. About 70 million die. It's hard to estimate. And then all this is getting in the ground, in the water, and in the rivers and estuaries and things like that. And there's from an insect point of view, I heard a figure just in America that we kill 1 quadrillion insects a year. And exactly. I mean, what's that going to do? I mean, that's the base of the food chain. I mean, how many reptiles, lizards, and birds weren't able to exist as a result of that 1 quadrillion insects being killed, or eating them and getting poisoned themselves, and then all the way up the food chain. It's a massive, massive environmental impact.
It is. Yes.
Yep. I'm glad you know this stuff.
Yeah. Well, you sort of have to. You run into people that are making these arguments, and I agree with you. I mean, this is something that I've looked at, and I say that not only is this the best way for us to eat as human beings, for our biological makeup, but it's the best for the environment. It's the best for the animals. If you look per calorie, the least deaths per calorie is grass finished bison, and very close second is grass finished beef. So I mean, you one bison is gonna last you 2 years as an individual of perfect nutrition.
Yeah,
and it's and then, or you can have your smashed avocado and kill 30,000 ground squirrels. It's up to you. but don't kid yourself and think that, it doesn't count just because, it's one step removed. It's only one step removed. It's not like it's well hidden. That brings me to the other question. You said that we're using up all this, land that we could be growing crops on because of all these filthy animals, or we're growing a lot of crops in order to feed the animals, and we could just eat those ourselves. And then the extension of that is, okay, well, what if we agree that meat is the way to go, both for our health and the health of the environment? Can we sustain enough animals to feed the 8 billion people?
It's a good question. But the other question from that is, can we sustain the what we're doing now, growing crops and going to more crops?
Absolutely.
As I was saying, we're producing animal foods from marginal land. We wouldn't be producing anything from 2/3 of the world's agricultural land if we just went to a plant-based diet. So, and the other thing is that we can't sustain this level of environmental damage that arable farming is causing. If we want to continue growing crops for those people that want to continue eating fruit and vegetables, and so on, then what we have to do is do it in a different way and put animals back into the crop rotations, grass and animals back into those rotations.
I mean, you've heard it's probably about 10 years old now, the pessimist saying, there's 60 harvests left if we carry on this way, crop farming.
Yeah, I had heard that.
We're destroying our soil.
More like 50 now. So excuse me, if you think we're worrying about can we feed the world with livestock? Well, you ain't going to feed the world much longer with crops the way we're going.
No. And plus, as we were saying about food waste, the amount of land that is wasted is 1.4 billion hectares of the world's land is wasted in producing waste food every year. And 3 times the volume of Lake Superior of water every year is being wasted to grow. And it's mainly crop waste.
That ends up in your waste bin.
Yeah. If we halved that crop waste, we would be able to feed the world in terms of numbers. Of course, we know that feeding people is far more than just the volumes of food that you produce. So yeah, it's if we were to convert more of our land to grass, and we should. One of the things that we are clear about is that we are not in favour of intensive livestock production, because that is harmful. Grain-fed, confined livestock, pigs, poultry, are mainly grain-fed and confined. Intensive dairy production, intensive grain-fed beef production. These are all harmful. One of the main reasons that they're harmful is because of the harms caused by the grain production and the harms caused by the soya that is needed to provide extra protein particularly for pigs and poultry. Whereas grazing livestock, cattle and sheep, if you rear them on pasture, they don't need any extra protein. Yes, you're more extensive, but we've got to consider the environmental benefits and find a way forward of doing this. The other thing that people never seem to realise is that a lot of the crops that we feed to livestock are actually crop wastes and byproducts that we can't eat. So crops produce a huge amount of waste products like straw, rice hulls. In the east of England, we were feeding a lot of waste vegetables. So although it was an arable area, tens of thousands of sheep would come in the autumn to graze on the brassica waste and this kind of thing. All that stuff would just be lying on the land or have to be ploughed in, producing lots of more emissions and so on. So you've got to look at the whole picture and not just think about, cows belch out methane. That's bad.
We haven't seen. We have thought about your question a lot, and we don't know, and we haven't seen anyone attempt a serious calculation of how much of the world could you feed if you if you veered much more towards pasture-fed livestock.
I have asked a few people in the know if we converted all cropland to pasture land for grazing livestock. One friend suggested that it would be possible, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. It's something we need to look at more, but the fact is that we can't go on the way we are with these crops. The Sustainable Food Trust in this country produced a report a couple of years ago called Feeding Britain from the Ground Up, which was a very good report, and they looked at this question to some extent, and their recommendations were that we should be cutting the amount of cereals, grains that we're growing, drastically cutting oilseed production and sugar beet production. We grow most of our sugar in this country comes from sugar beet growing. That we could cut a lot of that, not only to reduce the grain feeding of livestock, and that means converting more to beef and lamb production, pasture-reared beef and lamb, and away from pork and poultry, and reducing the intensivity of dairy farming, because dairy cows can be reared at pasture with a lot less grain feeding, a lot less artificial inputs, just as beef and lamb can be. So we could do those things. And we would say that we could go a step further, not only reducing the amount of grains that you're feeding because the grains that you're feeding to livestock, but also for the benefit of all our health, reducing the amount of grains that we're growing to feed to humans, and definitely eliminating oil seeds. Okay, we all like a little sugar here and there, but
yeah, it's interesting. The Sustainable Food Trust, they suggested this rebalancing of farming in the UK to try and make us more sustainable. But they said two other things would have to happen at the same time. Otherwise, we still wouldn't be anything like self-sufficient. Number one was waste less.
Yeah.
So all the way from the field to your fridge, waste less food. And number two, eat less. Less calories, because otherwise the sums don't add up. You're not going to eat less if you're craving carbohydrates all the time. Another benefit that I'm not sure if we said it already with the Sapiens diet, is you find yourself less hungry.
Yeah.
You feel fuller for longer on animal-based foods, on meat foods. If you're not spiking that insulin, you then don't get the insulin crashes. You don't feel desperate for a mid-morning snack, mid-afternoon snack, late evening snack. So we got to eat less.
And one of the things, when I speak to friends and that about what I eat, and they assume that I'm eating great plate loads of steak all the time, 3 times a day and snacks in between, that sort of thing. Of course we're not. I eat usually twice a day, sometimes just once, and I'm sure this is familiar to you, Anthony, because you don't have that hunger, and also we're not eating large amounts of just lean meat on our diet. It's moderate protein level, high fat. In this country, it's criminal, and globally as well. One of the things that has happened in our agriculture over the last 40 years, in my working life, is that we have completely changed our cattle herd for beef production cattle in this country, away from native breeds of British native breeds like the Hereford, and so on, and changed over to European continental breeds like the Charolais and the Limousin. And the main driver for that was because they are leaner, and it's all based on the diet heart hypothesis. They also grow faster, but they need more grains to do that. They're less suited to our kind of pasture, really. And what happens when animals go to slaughter to produce a beef carcass is because of this this idea about fat being bad for us, we have a classification system, a carcass classification system for the animal. And if the animal is more than a certain level of fat on it, back fat and so on, the farmer is penalized. So, and often also they are trimming off huge amounts of fat from every carcass. About 10% of the fat on 10% of the carcass weight is being trimmed off as fat. It's either going into pet food or industrial products when we should be eating it.
It's brain food. It's brain food.
Yeah. And a lot of the offals, of course, that we don't eat anymore. A lot of the organ meats we just no longer eat. It's very wasteful.
It's become a habit, hasn't it, of people who estimate the value of meat. They only count the protein.
Yeah, it's in the UN figures.
We don't fat.
The UN assessments only talk in terms of methane or emissions per kilo of protein, and so
saying per kilo of nutrient.
Yes, yeah. So they actually end up in those assessments saying that we should move from what livestock production we do have, move from extensive, i.e. grazing livestock, to intensive pigs and poultry, white meat. That's just crazy. And the only reason is because they only think about the protein content. And chickens, obviously, in particular, are much leaner than cattle and sheep. Because they don't see any value in fat, and they just see it as
and they assume there's no vitamin or nutritional content either. And so it's completely insane.
Yeah, and again, it goes against that kind of policy. Is anti-pastoralist society. It's another excuse for removing people from their land.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Have you guys come across Dr. Peter Ballerstedt?
Yes.
Yeah. Really, really interesting guy. And some of the things he mentioned to me make me think that we really can't afford not to switch to meat to feed the 8 billion people out there, simply because of how amazing these ruminant animals and grazing animals are for the environment. And the fact is that what he said, including the oceans and seas, that only 4% of the Earth's surface is arable land. And that competes with cities. Every Greenwich Village, that used to be Greenwich Farm. And so these are all going to be competed for places to live. Whereas about 25% of the Earth's surface is either rangeland or forest land, both of which can have animals run on them. And you don't have to tear them up. You don't have to, knock down the Amazon forest or anything like that to do that. You can run this through, just as is, and you actually make the environment better. You make the soil better. You make everything better, and you make the land more fertile to grow crops if you want to have a mixed attack at this. And like you say, in the historical way of having this sort of crop rotation, having animals come, it goes back to the Bible. I mean, the Old Testament even says, every 7 years you have to leave your field alone, let animals come on it, and then you can go back to it. So going back to that, you could still grow plants if you wanted to. You don't have to feed them to your livestock, but you wouldn't even have to. And because of that, you can actually improve the land. That was one thing that Alan Savory has been doing for 40 years now. He's been reversing deserts with large grazing animals. And so whereas the agriculture and the things that we're doing, because we don't have enough animals, are not able to eat down the old dead grasses, or we're spearing desertification, the farming tactics and monofarming crop tactics in the early 1900s sparked the Dust Bowl era in America, where something like 25 feet deep in topsoil at one point in the middle of America, and then it was a Dust Bowl. They had completely wiped out all of the topsoil. That wasn't from animals. That was because we got rid of all the we got rid of the bison who made all that topsoil, and then we started farming and cropping, and we destroyed the soil, and we recognized that at the time. Oh, okay, well this is part of the practice, and we changed those practices. But as Peter said, we even now with the best techniques we have, we're still losing 27.5 billion tons of topsoil each year, which is an area the size of Kentucky and comparable to England. So it's a massive area that we're losing every single year. And it can take 500 years to grow a centimeter of topsoil. So that's a vanishing resource. I mean, forget petrochemicals, like that will run out. And so, we really need to be on top of that. And so for those reasons, I think that we have to go to meat. I don't think there's another option. 50 growing cycles left, unless you intervene and start making the land more healthy and rich. And then you might extend that.
Yeah. And what one of the things here is that there's an absolute craze on planting trees. Every corporate is providing trees to plant everywhere, and that may be appropriate on arable land. We can plant more trees on arable land. It's not appropriate on grassland because temperate grassland stores more carbon than temperate forest does, and it stores it more safely because most of the carbon's in the trees above ground in a forest, whereas with grassland the carbon is underground and it's protected from wildfires and so on. So it's insane to think about planting trees mainly that's happening. It's a policy of the Welsh government at the moment that Welsh farmers have to plant up 10% of their land with trees. Why not tell the East Anglian farmers to plant the trees over there, because we've got grassland in Wales.
Double standards again.
Very good. So what is the Sapien diet? What should humans be eating for both our own health and the health of the planet?
We should be eating meat from regeneratively farmed livestock, comprising of animal fat, meat, and offal. That's the healthiest diet for people and planet.
So we have a new food pyramid. We threw the old one away, rebuilt it. The base of it is now
animal fat,
but it's not as if that's 70% of your dinner plate is covered in fat. It's fatty cuts of meat and so on. So again, it's the opposite of what we're used to being told. Forget lean meat. If you're going to choose a meat, choose a fatty one. It's not huge on protein, our new pyramid, so it's not too
15 to 20%.
15 to 20%. And then we do allow at the top an occasional
optional
bit
up
of
to 10%
fruit and
vegetables.
For us, carbohydrates, the reason, yes, they're gorgeous when you eat them, of course, and they're more rich, but they shouldn't be a staple. The Eat Well food plate describes them, base every meal around 30% or more of starchy carbs. And we completely reject that. For us, carbs should be a treat, a very occasional treat. If it's Christmas, don't worry about it. If it's your birthday, if you're on holiday, don't worry. But the majority of the year, carbs are a treat, not a staple. And so our new pyramid is fat, meat, offal, and the occasion optional fruit and veg.
Yeah, very good. And I've found, for myself, I've sort of, gravitated to this from a evolutionary standpoint. I studied botany and biology, cancer biology, saw all the different ways that plants protect themselves from a chemical nature. eliminated those, felt better than I've ever felt in my entire life. Realized that I'd been doing that for 5 years in my early 20s when I was playing professional rugby, during and after my undergraduate degree. And realized, wait, hold on, because I studied this, and I had a cancer biology professor that actually was just really, really strongly hammering home the idea that plants have these toxins and that they're actually quite carcinogenic, and had dozens, if not over 100 known carcinogens. And he expressed to us that he did not eat salads or vegetables and would not let his children eat vegetables because, in his words, plants are trying to kill you. And so, like, why are you eating these things? And so I said, right, no more of that. And I just stopped on him, and just that was my only litmus test was like, is there a plant in that? No, thank you. And so I ended up just eating eggs and meat for the next 5 years. Never felt better in my life. Every few months, I thought to myself, do I need a multivitamin, or do I need a banana or something? And I remember thinking to myself, well, I feel good. My gums aren't bleeding, so we'll just ride this out and see how it goes. And of course, never had any problems, only had improvements. Slipped off of this actually when I was in England because some of the meat I was trying to get there had some crumbs on it, and I was like, well, is that dose makes the poison? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And so I convinced myself that eating this, a few days a week, crumb sort of chicken, that it was just easy. I could just buy racks of this at Sainsbury and just not have to worry about it, and just eat that and chicken and eggs. And it made a big difference. I didn't put the two together, but at 25, I felt like a superhero. At 25 and a half, I did not. And I chalked it up to age. I guess that's it. That's the time we just start nosediving and start dying. And I just, didn't figure it out until many years later, when I realized that's sort of what I was doing, and that's sort of our biological design, and things started to click. And that's when I started looking into this. But when I started going away from that, I was just like, well, there's toxins in there. There's no thank you. And I, come across, Dr. Robert Lustig's work on fructose and how harmful that was. All the information that came out subsequently, especially after 2015, about how we got cholesterol completely wrong and saturated fat as well. And so I went away from that, and I felt like a 22-year-old again. At 38 years old, I went back and started playing professional rugby and felt amazing. And when I dabbled in with some of those things and just sort of tested, okay, well, what does this do to me? Maybe have a bite or have some seasonings on it or a cup of coffee. I felt dreadful, and it persisted for sometimes days. In case of a cup of coffee, I was sore for 2 days, and I was, no, thank you. I don't need that in my life. And so I think that's a great approach. I mean, no one has to do it like me. I do this because I see how that makes me feel. And having a bunch of carbs, like a bit of rice and beans got stuck onto some meat I was eating at a restaurant. It felt like someone was stabbing me in the spine for 4 days. It was so painful. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I haven't had back pain this entire time. I've always had back pain, as an athlete. And then I thought, for those 5 years, my early 20s, I didn't have any back pain. There's a gap between, there's 15 to 20, and then, 25 onwards, I just had horrible back pain. And there's just this one little nice sweet spot between 20 and 25. I didn't have back pain. And now at 38, I didn't have back pain again. I was like, what the hell is going on there? So
do you stick to the diet 100%?
No, I haven't cheated once. No, no, thank you.
Gosh. Wow.
Yeah,
and no tea or coffee,
no. I go on the principle that these things are from plants, and plants have toxins, and beans are seeds of plants baby, and it's typically things protect their babies more than anything. So you commonly find the highest concentration of toxins in the seeds, nuts, beans, legumes, etc. Most legumes will kill you if you don't cook them properly. So, 5 red kidney beans, as per the WHO, has put people in the hospital with acute lectin poisoning, and the WHO is no fan of the carnivore diet. Let me tell you. So they have an entire webpage. It's very interesting, called "Natural Toxins in the Food We Eat," in food. And it talks about all the different sorts of classifications and classes of toxins in plants and in mushrooms and algae. There isn't a single mention of anything being found in meat. Not a single.
Exactly.
There's nothing.
It's astonishing that the media portray it as if, you know, you eat some red meat, you're going to get struck down the next day with bowel cancer.
Yeah.
And yet, I don't know if it's the same where you are, but, you know, in the UK, there are 14 foods that have to be identified on a restaurant menu.
Yeah,
and there's fish on there, there's dairy, there's gluten, and of course there's nuts and seeds. But there's nothing about red meat. So the stuff that could kill, I know it's an extreme acute reaction to these foods very often, but the stuff that's going to make you uncomfortable, give you a bad stomach, whether it's lactose or gluten, or whether it's going to give you a bad, you know, response, is all plant foods. And yet this goes under the radar in the media.
I think for myself, something. Sorry, Dave.
But why is it this? They don't pick up on this. These are meant to be our natural foods, but these are the ones warned about on every single product that you buy in a supermarket or buy at a restaurant. They have to have these warnings.
Yeah,
and we live with it. Why?
I found that what I recognised was that I'd lived with symptoms all my life that I thought were just what everybody lived with. And when I cut out the plant foods, I realised that, you know, you didn't have to live with those things like brain fog and bloating, these kind of things, you know, all sorts of different things that I thought were just normal, or as you say, getting a bit older and that sort of thing, you know. Yeah.
And we chalk this up, you know, as physicians, you know, we see this, and it is just the normal state of humanity, probably very similar to ancient Rome when they had lead pipes and didn't realize this was causing a problem. Everybody was having the same conditions. And so we thought, well, that's just part of getting older. Your hair's supposed to bleed and fall out. It's like, no, I don't think that's normal. And they figured it out. You know, there's lead poisoning. I think we're in our lead pipe era, that we're getting poisoned and harmed by something in our environment. I would say it's the food largely, but the other environmental toxins and pesticides, etc. But we are being damaged, and we just don't recognize what it is. And so we keep exposing ourselves. And when you stop doing that, all of a sudden these diseases, they simply go away. And I've applied that to my patient population. I've seen diseases go away that are right now considered irreversible. We're getting ready to publish a case series on multiple sclerosis patients who have not only completely reversed their symptoms, some people were crippled in bed, could not get out, or in wheelchairs, and you know, considering, you know, assisted suicide and things like that. And now not only are they completely normal functioning by and large, their MRIs have shown regression, some almost near complete regression over the course of years, but some only 8 months, and a 50% regression in lesions, which is really not really described as happening in the literature. This is supposed to be a progressive issue, and yet it doesn't have to be all of a sudden. Diabetes, that just goes away. I mean, that's been shown in large scale interventional trials now from Verta Health and elsewhere. And so when you apply that to your patient population, all of a sudden these other diseases that come as a consequence of your hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia seem to go away as well. Kidney function improves, vision. I've had people who are needing lower and lower prescriptions on their glasses. I mean, I wasn't expecting that one. That was, you know, that was definitely a surprise. Autoimmunity, again, those just go away from whatever the cause. You just start eating beef and water, it goes away. And this was in the literature.
I think my hearing's improved.
Yeah, very great. And, you know, and this was in the literature in the 1800s. We knew this. Dr. J.H. Salisbury, for whom the Salisbury steak was named, I thought it was like Salisbury, England or something like that, like a place name. But Dr. J.H. Salisbury, who was a New York doctor in the 1800s, I don't know if you came across him, but he did a 30-year research project into optimal nutrition for human beings. He was an army doctor during the Civil War, did a lot of different research, and did experimental trials. Okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? 30 years he studied this, and he found that people, this long before processed food and even seed oils, and he found that people that were just eating more plants, more grains, more vegetables, more fruit, We're getting diseases other people simply weren't. We're more susceptible to tuberculosis, obviously a major killer in the 1800s. And he lived with the Native Americans who were largely eating bison. And they actually found that, by their own records, they were living to be 110, 115, sometimes 120 or so as healthy, vibrant adults, which sounds very far-fetched. But at the same time, as I was taught in genetics class in my undergraduate degree, 24 years ago, we're actually genetically designed to live 120 years on average based on the length of our telomeres. And so what that means is if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. You don't have to do HIIT training and, buy this, resveratrol or anything like that. Just be. And you should make it to 120 in good health, because the only reason that you're decaying slowly by the time you age to 75 or 80 and die is because you're damaging yourself. The only reason you're dying 40, 50 years early from the 120-year benchmark is because you've been sick for another 40 years before that, and you're just decaying to the point that your body just can't handle it anymore. So living to 120, it's not this constant decay where you're just turning to dust in a nursing home for 40 years. You're a healthy, vibrant, active adult because you're free of disease, you're free of decay, you're free of degeneration. And that's why you're making it to 120. And so Salisbury found that putting people back on that pure red meat and water diet, he said that beef was number one, lamb was a distant second. They also had older cows then. They didn't just have like yearlings, 2 yearlings as well. So it may have taken, the older animals may indeed have more nutrient density. That's something I'm sort of considering. And but either way, he found that putting them on a pure red meat and water diet, he could reverse rheumatoid arthritis, reverse Crohn's, reverse ulcerative colitis, reverse gout, help people recover from tuberculosis. I mean, this is 100 years before we had, at least 100 years before we had any treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, gout, all these other sorts of things. And he was reversing these things completely through diet. And he wrote a book called The Relation of Alimentation and Disease. So the relationship between the food we eat and the diseases we get. And it argues the exact same thing that I argue now, is that the diseases that we treat as a mainstay of modern medicine are not diseases per se. They're toxicities and malnutrition, a toxic buildup of a species-inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too many plants and strange chemicals that don't belong in our body and we can't really contend with very well. We don't have the biology for it, and not enough animal-based nutrition, which we are sorely lacking. Yeah.
I'd like to see one day in supermarkets, at the moment, the healthy shelf is reduced fat this or plant-based this. Yeah. And of course, waste of time. I'd like to see one day when it's high fat, but it's the low carb shelf or no carb shelf. If you want to lose weight, don't worry about the fat you're eating, worry about the carbs you're eating. And if you want to get the right nutrition, the supermarket's got it again, something else completely the wrong way round. Sad.
Yeah, it is. Something that you mentioned earlier, and maybe I'll leave you with this thought, and you can share your thoughts on this. With all this information readily available, I found it. It just something sparked my interest, and I just started going on to PubMed and just searching around. Okay, well, what is the information? What do we know? What can we prove? What do we need to find out? I was able to find a lot of this information. Then having these conversations with people such as yourself, I've learned more and more and more. So this information is readily available, and there are other books similar, making similar arguments that are out there. So why is it, do you think, that this is having such a difficult time getting basic truths and facts and reality out to the populace?
Because the average person reads what's in the newspapers or social media, and they just don't see it. And if you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. You have to be looking to come across all this information. And that's part of the reason why we've chosen the book title that we have. We want to get noticed. We want the average person to see it.
One of the things we did a couple of days ago, actually, was we put the book or parts of the book into one of these AI engines and said, please produce a summary. And it comes back with a summary. And then it said, you could also produce a podcast discussion between presenters. Oh, amazing. So we press the button, 5 minutes later, you've got this American style, you know, man and woman going backwards and forwards, having a conversation about the book. And it's interesting that the AI program said it wasn't going to, it only used the sources we gave it. But clearly there was a bit of an agenda going on somewhere, because it started talking about the cultural, and it actually was quite a good discussion. I'm amazed about, you know, the cultural importance of food, the social aspects of food, and the way it becomes identified with people. So if you criticize or even try to offer friendly advice to someone, you shouldn't be vegan, it's not good for your health, it's not good for the planet, they will become defensive and take it as a personal insult. So there is this natural human barrier. I've invested so much in enjoying what I thought was a good choice for me. Someone is now telling me different. I'm not going to listen. I'm going to clam up. But also just the cultural identity, the way we do enjoy eating out, socializing, cooking, and that's become so much about reinforcing the established but wrong diet. You know, we have the canapes, we have the pizzas, we have the alcohol, we have everything. It's enjoyable. And to be told, well, actually, no, you shouldn't be doing that most of the time, or indeed any of the time, it's a really difficult hurdle to get over.
And it's considered to be creative, isn't it? To bake and to cook lots of different sauces and all these things. It's considered to be creative and artistic. And we've got endless TV programs like Bake Off and Master Chef and so on, but Bake Off is just about baking cakes, and very, very popular and so on. And I think people, we've just got very poor science education as well, to be honest. And there's this belief that we're omnivores and we should have this so-called balanced diet and so on. There's also the busyness of life and everybody working and needing quick food and so on. And because I think the other thing is, we've talked about agriculture only having been around for about 10,000 years, but in terms of our history and the transmission of history orally and in writing, that's only happened in the last few thousand years, during which we've been based on agriculture and grains. So most people just have no idea that we were eating meat and almost nothing but meat before.
Yeah. We've been asked this question before. Why hasn't it landed more broadly? So we hope the book might make a difference. I think until the media wake up, outlets like the BBC, for instance, they're totally deaf to this kind of stuff. It puzzles me sometimes. Until this becomes a routine conversation that is much more balanced and much more recognized about the goodness of meat and how good animal farming can be, we're struggling to convince people. How do you convince a wider majority of people? Even our friends, you can have this conversation and they say, I understand you, I listen, I understand everything you've just said. And we say, are you going to change your diet? And it's just, difficult.
Yeah. Well,
some friends have changed. No, I agree. It's not totally fruitless.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you in the diabetes clinic. Yeah.
Exactly.
Something that I've sort of been playing around with as well is that it's like you say, we know what we have access to. Not everybody's willing to dig in, but also, we don't know what we don't know. And, I didn't look into this the way I did until I was 38. And I've been through medical school, undergrad, all these different sorts of things, practicing medicine, all these things. And it never really occurred to me that we were looking at this wrong until all of a sudden I had that click. And so if we're never not getting exposed to it, it was just an off chance thought that I had this, and everything just sort of clicked into place. And so, people are being spoon fed their information, even in university. I mean, we get a degree, and it's sort of this cookie cutter sort of, you need to, for a biology degree in most countries. America has a bit more leeway, and I'm sure, and many colleges do, but a lot of them, just like for a degree in general biology or molecular biology, you have to take this class and then this class and then this class and then this class and then this class. And so you have the exact same exposure, the exact same information. And so you're going to all make the exact same insights, which are none. And so we're not looking at this from different angles. But one thing that I came across recently in the discussion was that the food and drug companies are the major sponsors of media outlets. And as such, they have a lot of sway on what stories get out there. And if a story's coming out, or some papers coming out, or God forbid the WHO does something useful like classify aspartame as a carcinogen, all hell breaks loose, and all of these stories go, hey, you need to back us up, and get a bunch of doctors on here saying no, aspartame's safe, and they don't know what they're talking about, and all these sorts of things. And so it really does dictate what stories get out to us. More sinister and very, very much concerning is that I was speaking to professors from various colleges, and actually I'll be interviewing a professor from MIT, Professor Stephanie Seneff, who's been doing quite a lot of work on glyphosate for over a decade. And she was saying that it's not just the media outlets whose main advertisers and main funders are the food and drug companies and the major industries. It's the scientific journals too. And so she's finding it very difficult to publish any of her papers. She's a 40-year tenured professor at MIT. I mean, there's no one on earth should be in that condition. No one should be denying any papers this person comes out with. She's a major academic figure in America and the world, and yet her papers are not seeing the light of day because they're getting so much pressure from their major sponsors who would be hurt by the findings that she has. And so we're not seeing that. Then contrast that with specifically nutrition. This was a figure by a whistleblower, Callie Means, who'd been working in the food and drug companies as an executive level sort of person. And he has sort of been saying a lot of the really, really underhanded practices that they've been carrying out for a long time. And he said that the whole processed food industry, the different companies, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, et cetera, Kellogg's, they spend 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH. And so the vast majority of scientific literature is being funded by exactly the wrong people who profit from getting it wrong. I looked up Coca-Cola just in 2015 was the most recent figures I could find, spent $119 million on nutritional research just in 2015, right? So, and just Coca-Cola. And so, it's a problem. Even what was it? Dr. Richard Horton he was the editor-in-chief of the Lancet, and then editor-in-chief of New England Journal of Medicine for like 15 years. I can't recall her name. I think it was Anglet or something like that. But they both came out publicly in recent years saying that there's rampant corruption in the medical journals, even the Lancet, even the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, et cetera. And he said that you have these studies that are very fraudulently done with retroactive endpoints and modeled in ways that get the outcomes that they want, and funded with all these different sorts of conflicts, et cetera. And he said that basically a good portion of the medical literature, it could just be completely fraudulent and false. And he said at least half. And the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal echoed that and said that it was a dark day in science. And you should look at all these different angles of attack that they have. They've really, really captured the scientific body. And so everything that's coming out there, we're not able to see any differing views. The majority of the studies out there are false or fraudulent, and they're being paid for by the industries who profit from this being wrong. And we're not able to see any alternate viewpoint because the only outlet is social media and podcasts and books, and those can be easily suppressed. I've been shadow banned multiple times. I go in these sort of ebbs and flows, and some videos will just not see the light of day. They will just be like, nope, no one's seen that one, and it's very strange because they should have been getting a lot more traction than they do. So yeah, I think it's very good work that you are all doing to try to get this message out there because it's so important. And I think I think it's a David and Goliath situation here, but I think the truth will out, and having more of these conversations and more of these books out for people to see, I think will help to win in the end. So thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's our hope as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, thank you all very much. When can people order the book, and where can they find it, and how can people find you and follow you and support your work?
So hopefully the book will be available in some form in a few days.
Great.
Certainly by the 1st of January, you should be able to buy it on most platforms through Amazon, etc.
We'll send you a link as soon as we have it available.
We've got a website that we're just building. We need to load. We've got 1,000 references we need to load up and put on this website, but we can share that with you, and we'll be tweeting very soon as well.
Oh, very good. Well, great. Well, I'll put all these links up on the description when we publish this video. I'll try to get this out before your book comes out, or maybe very shortly after, and hopefully get the timing right with that. And then people can look down the description and find your website and hopefully a link to your book when it becomes available.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.
Well, lovely talking to you.
Yeah, that's been
absolutely
great.
lovely. Yeah, well, thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking so much time. I realized that we've actually gone for about 2.5 hours. So that's great. Obviously, a lot of information to go through, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you all very much for that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Anthony. Bye.
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 And thank you all very much for joining. Really appreciate you coming on. Please do share this with someone who you think would enjoy this, and leave a comment and let us know what you think. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.